before I comment on the ever-evolving debt situation, let me say on the Boundaries Commission that I served on the Boundaries Commission, as well as my colleague Senator Gene Atherton. And we worked quite hard to get our work done in a timely fashion. In addition to myself and Senator Atherton, there were two members from the Progressive Labor Party, named Jennifer Smith and the Honorable Walter Roban, plus the two non-Bermudian members, Chairman Billy Miller, and the judicial member. And we all worked very hard to get our job done as fairly as possible. And quite frankly, it's offensive for the work that this commission did in good faith to be just treated so trivially, to just be sort of kicked to the curb, put on the back burner as something that is inconvenient. The way the constituencies in Bermuda have devolved from as a result of migration of residents had caused imbalances in the numbers that comprise various constituencies. Our job on the Boundaries Commission was to basically rebalance those constituencies. And most of that rebalancing was done with the superb computer program that we used to do that. So there was no gerrymandering. There was no gerrymandering possible, really. I can say that I was pleased with the work that the commission did, but I am very displeased as to how our report has been treated. It's been treated as something inconsequential by the Premier and the government, and I think that's wrong. So let me end those comments there. Now, insofar as the debt is concerned and the Finance Minister's recent statements on it, well, it's good to see that Finance Minister has remembered that there's such a thing as a sinking fund, because of, that, of course, was introduced by the United Bermuda Party governments way back in the time of Dr. Saul. And it was treated as a sort of inconvenience when things got bad for the government and government's cash flows. But now there's been a recommitment to the sinking fund. That's fine. But the question is that if the government continues to run deficits, particularly on current account, then they're going to have to borrow more money just to run the government. So the issue isn't whether or not you're going to make commitments to the sinking fund. The issue here is whether you can live within your means. The issue here is whether you can say that a budget is going to be X and you don't spend any more than X. That's the key. And Ms. Cox's performance in that particular respect has been very, very unsatisfactory, because every time the government says, even up to its most recent results, where they had forecast a particular budget deficit, and the deficit came in larger than they expected. So, you can talk all you like about sinking funds. Where the rubber meets the road here is whether or not you can control your costs. And cost control is one of the great weaknesses of this government. So,
you must have been encouraged then by what Mr. Terry Lister said at the launch of his premiership.
I wouldn't say I was encouraged. Mr. Lister has been complicit in this particular set of circumstances. He's been a cabinet minister almost since the day the Progressive Labor Party has been in government. So he cannot absolve himself. He cannot remove himself. He can't even excuse himself from all of this, particularly as someone who, one of the few people in this government who have expertise in finance. He can't excuse himself. He can't walk away. It's got to stick to him.
The point that she did make, of course, the finance minister, was that our amount of debt to GDP is so much lower than the rest of the world that we really don't have a lot to worry about.
Yeah, we keep hearing that. And I have pointed out a number of salient issues. You know, Bermuda's not like other countries. We are a one-horse town. I don't know how many times you heard me say that. Umpteen times. We're a one-horse town. We have one principal industry. That puts us at very high risk. If that industry falters, then the whole island economy falters. Other countries to which we're being compared are diversified economies. They're large economies, but they're diversified. And because of that diversification, the risk of faltering is a lot less. So to take these benchmarks from other countries is really not meaningful. You know, I could be cruel and say it was a you know, a deliberate distraction, but I won't say that. But the fact of the matter is that these comparisons are not meaningful. There probably is no other country like Bermuda. Most importantly, though, Brian, the key thing is the trend. You know, if you can't compare yourself to other countries, compare yourself to your own record, right? And your own record says that we have escalating costs, we have budgets that keep getting busted every year, and we need to control those things. And until we do, I will keep preaching this particular gospel.
Can I ask you what your reaction is to Mr. Kenneth Dill's complaint about the PAC?
I have very high regard for Major Dill. He's a friend of mine going a long way back, and a friend of my family. But he is not correct in this particular regard. His letter, I understand what his responsibilities are in the civil service, and I can imagine some of the civil servants may not have been happy with the report of the Public Accounts Committee. But we have a job to do. And our job has to do with investigating and finding out things that relate to the efficiency of government, whether the government's doing things that provide value for money. We found some things that were troubling. And insofar as his letter is concerned, there were two principal, if you like, complaints. The first complaint was that the Public Accounts Committee had found that the Global Hue contract had not been vetted by the Attorney General. And Mr. Dill said that it was. Well, we have documents to show that it was not. I mean, simple as that. And these findings were findings of the Auditor General. These are not something that we didn't pull this from the sky. These are findings from the Auditor General. And there are also documents that show that the Department of Tourism admitted that the contract wasn't vetted. So that takes care of that. The other issues had to do with, and his letter was confused as related to matters about whether financial instructions were breached in the granting of the Global Hue contract. And let me say this for the record, that there were two contracts. The first, when Global Hue was initially retained, that one did not breach financial instructions. But when that contract ended, Global Hue was rehired, something that we refer to as a rollover. They were rehired. The rehiring did not conform with financial instructions because there was no bidding. They just rolled over the contract. And financial instructions said you can't do that. But the crux of the matter is here, Brian, is that the excuse given for that was that there was a cabinet decision.